So in science class, we all learned that we have a genus. It's a classification. It tells what group we're in. We're all humans or Homo sapiens. That's our genus. It's what's the same about all of us. But our genius is what makes us different. Our genius is the unique spirit that dwells in each person. We all have our own combination of talents and skills and style that make us unlike anyone else. Now, we've gotten it confused in our culture. We think that genius refers only to people who score at the top 2% of the standardized IQ test. But genius is much more than that. It is a spirit that's alive and unique within each person. Everyone has their own genius. We are each a one-of-a-kind, never-to-be-repeated human being. Standardized education and mass culture are ways that try to homogenize us to be just like everyone else, to read the same things, to have the same haircut and handbag, and to try to fit in with the crowd. But as Shakespeare wrote, all the world is a stage. And we come onto that stage, not to be like every other actor that's on the stage, but to play our special part. This month, our theme has been calling or vocation. It's about discovering our genius. Now, last weekend, I was supposed to be in Washington, D.C. to speak at the funeral for one of my most important mentors in ministry. Unfortunately, I had COVID, so I couldn't go. His name was Reverend Ken McLean. We all need people in our life who see in us our talent and our abilities that we can't even see in ourselves. It's been said that what we want in a mentor is someone who truly cares for you and who will look after your interests and not just their own. And it's said that when you come across the right person to mentor you, you want to start showing them that the time that they spend with you is worthwhile. When I met Ken, he was 70 years old. He had just retired from a very successful ministry in one of our largest churches in the Washington, D.C. area. He had just lost his wife of almost 40 years as they were embarking on a trip to Alaska. He has a son about my age, and I became his intern for 2 years at the headquarters of the Unitarian Universalist Association in Boston while I was in seminary. Now, after working for him for about a whole year, he came into the office one day, and he asked me if I remembered meeting the man who had come by a couple weeks ago who was from England. He then explained, he and I have fallen in love. I think it was the first time anyone came out to me in my life until that point. And I have to tell you, I was not expecting it. Now, of course, coming out to me, a 20-something Unitarian Universalist seminarian, was not particularly threatening to him, I wouldn't think. But coming out to his congregation of 20 years, who watched him and his wife raise their son, now that was something different. Would they be mad? Would they feel betrayed? Would they feel lied to? Might they revoke his status as their minister emeritus, something that meant a great deal to him, an honored relationship with these people who he loved and who had for so long loved him? And now he had to wonder, how would they respond when he revealed a secret that he had been keeping to himself for his entire life? That year, it was 1997, Ken visited his former church, which is called Cedar Lane. It's in Bethesda, Maryland. And upon returning home, back to Boston, he penned the following words to his congregation. During my recent visit to Cedar Lane, as opportunities presented themselves, I found myself telling good friends what I had told my family this summer, that I have fallen in love with a man, and he loves me. There it is. I've said it, what I thought I could never say to Cedar Lane. Perhaps I thought I couldn't trust a whole congregation that much, even Cedar Lane. And when I was with you this time, something made me decide that I could. Many of you will think of Harriet. After all, you knew me all those years as your married minister. Harriet was my good and loyal wife for almost 40 years. We loved each other. And at the end of her life, Harriet felt good about our life together. Some of you will raise the question of honesty. I can only tell you that for a gay man growing up when I did, honesty was a luxury. I could not have been allowed to be a teacher or a minister if I had been honest about my sexual orientation. There were no models for me. I did the best that I could to live out my commitments. Now, a new phase of my life is beginning. For the blessing of a new love and the support of family and friends, I have only gratitude. I have to keep reminding myself that I'm the same person. Thank you for letting me share. And he sent the letter to his congregation and waited to see how they would respond. And blessing of blessings, the church responded with open arms and open hearts, and they continued to care for one another for 27 more years until he died just recently. Now, without going into a lot of detail, I think it's important that you know that he was one of the most distinguished ministers in our tradition of his generation. Reverend Ken McLean helped to lead and in some cases form a number of the most critical organizations within this tradition of ours. He helped to establish the International Council of Unitarians and Universalists, bringing together churches and folks from all over the world, India and Sri Lanka and Africa and all around the world. He created the senior ministers of large Unitarian Universalist churches group. He created something called the Office of Church Staff Financing to help ministers and retired ministers and their spouses and widows and widowers to be able to get through financially. He did more to advance the credentialing of religious educators like Shannon Boston, who told our story earlier, than any other ordained minister in our tradition. And he served on the Unitarian Universalist Association Board, the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee Board, the Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association. It's hard to imagine Unitarian Universalism as we know it today if he had not become one of our ministers. Now, yet despite all this institution building that he did and his service to the wider association, ask anyone who knows Ken McLean, and they will tell you that he was an incredibly pastoral presence in times of crisis. The most poignant moments of his ministry will not be recorded anywhere. The late night calls, the prayers, the hugs, the hands that he held, some hands trembling with fear, some cold with impending death, all made warm by his touch. I know about this personally because Ken held my hand and my wife's on our wedding day when they were pulsing with expectation. And then years later, he flew across the country with a broken neck. His entire upper body was encased in a hard plastic cast. He was almost 80 years old. And when he should have been home convalescing, he was hopping on airplanes so that his hands could hold our hands again after the unexpected death of our daughter, when we most needed his kind of presence. In fact, he led the interment ceremony when we spread her ashes around the tree that's right behind me through this window. But perhaps the biggest thing, most important thing he did for me was that he believed in me. He shared his experience of life and ministry and marriage with me. And he told me, he said, you can be a really good minister. Now, whenever we set off on a career or some new endeavor, we are never quite sure if we're going to succeed. If you go to art school or med school or decide to train to become a truck driver or to join the Air Force because you want to fly airplanes, if you've ever dared to try to achieve a life goal, you know the insecurity of taking that first step and saying, hey, I think I can do this. I want to do this. And we know that we could fail. Who am I to think I could be a minister? And having someone who believes in you and sees in you and who will be honest with you, it can make all the difference. And in his case, it really did. Sometimes it's just one word that someone says to us, and it can completely change the direction of our life or our sense of who we are. They might just say, you're talented, or you're smart, you're creative, oh, you're a natural, you have what it takes, or I'm proud of you. These words can send someone's life like a rocket ship in the direction of our destiny. I remember when my mom told me years ago, I was 19 years old, and she told me that she thought I'd make a good Unitarian Universalist minister. And little did she know the kind of crazy stuff I was involved in back then, which I won't go into right now. But, I thought she planted a seed in my mind. It wasn't something I'd ever thought about before. It wasn't on my bingo card, as we say. But her saying that, it planted a seed. Having a vision of our future can save our life. I have never forgotten the story of Viktor Frankl, who was Jewish. He was in a concentration camp during World War II. And at one point near the end of the war, the Nazis were moving them from the camps, and it required a forced march through the ice and the snow. None of them had eaten very much. They were all emaciated. And at one point, Frankl felt like he wasn't going to make it. And he slipped on the ice and he fell. And there he was, lying on the ground, and he realized he had no energy to lift himself back up. And a German soldier came over and he started yelling at him and hitting him with the butt of his rifle and telling him to get up. If you don't get up, you're going to be shot. And left dead right here. And he had no energy, and he had very little will to live at that point. But then he saw in his mind's eye himself a few years later at a conference in Europe telling the story of what was happening to him right then. And there was something in that vision of the future that gave him enough energy to get up and to keep walking. And he first told that story a few years later at a conference in Europe. Having a vision for ourselves and the future can save our life. Because so much in life tries to destroy or deny a person's genius, person's unique sense of self. My mentor, Ken, he grew up when a person, being who he was said to be shameful and bad and something to hide or try to get rid of. So he and so many others had to hide this important part of themselves in order to live their calling of what they loved to do in the world and were good at. Viktor Frankl reminds us of how the Nazis tried to deny Jews their humanity and their very lives. It's a long list of ways that we can have our unique spirit dampened or snuffed out by this culture or by the world or by life events. And yet, there have been people over and over again who have given a vision of a different way of being in society. Whether it was the women who stood up in Seneca Falls and said, what do you mean? Women can vote and do anything that men can do. Or those who stood up at Stonewall and said, being gay is, we shouldn't be arrested, we shouldn't have to hide or be shamed because of that. And there are so many stories of times when people shared something that then gave people a new vision of how to be humanity. I was talking in the last service about the story, the parable that comes from the scriptures, and I share it here in the humanist service only because it's a humanist story. It's not a story about anything supernatural. It's the story of when, if you know it, the adulterous woman in the temple. It's a story of when this woman was caught in adultery, and back then the culture was that if a woman was caught in adultery, you stone her to death. So the people had surrounded her with stones, and they were gonna do what they thought good people were supposed to do in such situations, and they were about to stone this woman. And at that time, as the parable goes, Jesus stood up next to her and he said, "Oh, wait a minute, y'all." He probably didn't say y'all, but if he were in Oklahoma, he would have said that. And he said, how about this? How about the one out there who has not done anything wrong, who's never sinned in some way or done something that you're not proud of, made a mistake? Why don't you go ahead and throw the first stone? And the people looked around, and eventually, one by one, they dropped their stones and walked away. And when it was just him and her, he looked at her and said, "You are forgiven. Go and sin no more." And he, with that one story, gave us a vision of a world where we can give each other a second chance, where we can look at one another and know, hey, I know you're having a tough time. You've done something, and I know I've made mistakes. How can we love each other and create a community where people, yes, for our children especially, can create a community? It's can I see myself in somebody else? Can I see my troubles in their troubles? Can I see my humanity in their humanity? And I think of my mentor, Ken, who was so talented, clearly called to being a minister. He was a teacher before, and then he became a minister and a father. And yet, someone of his sexual orientation would not be allowed to do any of those things if they were honest in the culture at that time. So he, like so many others, had to try to adjust to a maladjusted world while also finding ways to quietly try to change it. But what I hope for this community, All Souls, is that together, this community that we are together creating every week, every time we get together, we in each generation and each year, we're creating this community. We make it what it is. And I want it to be a place where people can mentor and be mentored, a place where people can see and be seen, a place where we can be honest about who we are and be fully accepted, a place where nobody throws stones and everyone can live their unique genius. And so this is what I want to charge you to do in the coming days or the coming weeks. If you have someone in your life who is still alive, who helped you to see yourself and to become who you are, I want you to write them a letter or give them a phone call or take them out for coffee and share with them how important they are to you and what they did for you. And alternatively, or in addition, I want you to think of how you're expressing your genius. Are you dampening or holding back some of your uniqueness, your creativity, your beauty, what makes you different from me and everybody else? Because if you don't share who you are, the rest of us miss out. The world misses out. There will never, ever again be anybody like you. And you came into the world in your unique way, and if you don't share it, it'll never be known. So let's all take the opportunities we have not only to live our truth, but also to share what we see, the genius in others, and encourage that in one another. Let's take every opportunity we can to speak authentic words into each other's lives, encouraging words. You might just change somebody's life forever, and you might just change the impact of your own. I love you. I love your genius. I love what we do here every week, every time we gather together. Let us continue to do so with great gratitude for the blessing of being alive. The whole world is a stage. We all come onto it at some point, and we're all going to exit at some time. We never know when. So let us live the life and the truth that is uniquely ours right now. Thank you.
Wake now. Wake now. Wake now, your vision